Hi, welcome to this week's Authors Love Readers podcast, where we delve into the stories behind the stories. We're asking authors questions, some of them fun, some of them serious, and from their answers, you're going to learn things you never knew about the people who write the stories you love. My name is Patricia McGlynn. I'm your host and designated question asker.
I'm Kelly McClymer, and I'm an author who loves readers.
Now, let's start the show. Hi, and welcome to this week's edition of Authors Love Readers podcast. My guest this week is Kelly McClymer, and I was trying to think how long we've known each other. It's been a while, and I think it is all through Novelists Inc. The listeners of the podcast know that tends to come up fairly frequently, and we have spent time together at various conferences talking about the business and life and writing, and more recently at a gathering in San Francisco that Kelly helps organize, which was a lot of fun. It was really interesting. And I did a podcast with Lisa Huey, and she referred to that. And at that point, I was pining and saying I wish I would get to go, and I got to go. So yay! And Kelly, tell us a little bit about your writing.
Well, I have to say that I have to start with my reading, which is what started me as a writer. And I pretty much love to read all genres, all kinds of fiction. And I always have ever since I was a little kid. So I write in many different genres. And I write historical romance, I write a cozy mystery, I write science fiction, I write fantasy, I write short stories. I haven't tried a thriller or a horror because those books scare me, so I don't really want to scare myself.
Well, you have covered quite a bit there, and I'm sure we will come back and we will talk about pieces about all of that, I think. For now, though, let me ask you some questions to let readers get to know you a little bit. And you talked about being, those books scare you. So let's go right with, do you have strong fears? And if you do, how do you deal with them? Do you put them in books? Do you stay away from them?
Well, I guess I could say that Stephen King, some of his early books, pretty much he covered every one of my super big fears. The strangers, being followed by a stranger, or, the typical teenage story. Stephen King, he's just really good. He gives a supernatural twist to the fear, which really makes it much, much worse. So, I mean, you're afraid that, when you're driving your car, you're going to lose control for a second. Much worse if the car actually has a mind of its own and it doesn't let you do what you want to do. So, and the other big thing, of course, always being a mom, I'm always afraid, if my children are out of my sight, and my children are all grown now, but I still worry about it. If they're out of my sight, something bad will happen. And of course, Stephen King has many, many, many stories that do that. And I'm not afraid of dogs anymore, but I used to be terrified of them. So reading Cujo was extremely difficult for me. And people who've seen the movie don't really understand why, because you have to read the book to really understand. But I've been hanging out with dogs. My sister had dogs, and my daughter has a dog. So I've learned not to be afraid of dogs.
Well, I'm glad you're not afraid of dogs now, but sorry you were. You went through that. And it's really interesting. And you like the car suddenly losing control of the car. That hardly. I don't know that that's ever occurred to me. On the other hand, I can remember distinctly being on an airplane and sitting next to the emergency opening and thinking, I wonder what would happen if I opened this.
Oh.
And I knew what would happen.
But that's
and
so much
I
worse.
didn't actually reach for it, but there was that There was that thought. So I might be more the scarer.
Oh, so you could write horror if you wanted to.
I don't except I don't yeah, I don't tend that way. I don't know where that thought came from, but I can remember that very clearly.
Well, so
What if?
I was just on a plane, and I have had those thoughts before. I'm like a disaster thinker. So I'm always, well, what could go wrong? And then as I've gotten older, I've learned to think, well, what can I do about that? And if the answer is nothing, then I just don't worry about it. But if the answer is, okay, well, you could do this, this, and this in these circumstances, then I'm like, all right, I sort of practice it in my head and calm myself down. I'm someone who always listens to the flight attendants talk,
Oh,
always.
they must love you. They must love you.
And I always think, I wonder if I could figure out quickly enough how to get that cushion out and stick my arms in it the right way. I'm sure that it would be interesting. I'd probably put it on backwards or something, but maybe that would still save my life. Who knows?
Yeah, and this is so indicative of the differences between us. I tend to think I'd probably have better ideas in the moment than the regulations. It might be dangerous, but it's like I think my dad was in the army. He was actually in World War II, and I think he was a great soldier for war. And he would have been really bad for peace, where they had to follow the rules and do things, but where
Oh,
he had
that's the
where he
difference.
where he had to kind of freelance and make the best of things, and yep. So I think I inherited that from him. And speaking of parents, do you have any sayings that your mom or dad used that now you hear coming out of your mouth?
I really don't.
Okay.
Except, there are occasionally a few things that I say, like, I it might offend somebody if I say it, but basically it's calling on. So I was raised Catholic. My parents were Catholic. So calling on the Holy Trinity, so to speak, by
Uh,
name in order, when I was a little bit annoyed at somebody. Um, and that's a big thing because that was like pretty much the only swearing that my father ever did, and I always laugh when I hear it coming out of my mouth because I'm like, oh, that is from my father.
yeah, yeah. Yep, we pick those things up. Did you have childhood books that addicted you to reading and deeper than that, not just the reading, but the idea of story?
Okay, I am I'm revealing my age here, but when I started reading, so my mother tried to teach me to learn to read before I went to first grade. I didn't go to kindergarten. Um, And I said, no, thank you. I'll learn in first grade. And
Oh.
then I was introduced to Dick and Jane, and literally my mother started to worry about me because she would send me outside and she would have to tell our neighbors, do not let her in. But I had a really kind neighbor who would hand the books out to me. And so I would go to her sliding glass door and I would knock on the door and she would open the door and hand me a book. And then I would sit outside and read. So I literally read everything. Everything anyone would hand
Oh,
me.
that's wonderful. And do you remember something specifically beyond Dick and Jane?
Um, there's so many. I'll just mention because the movie is released this year and it has Oprah in it. It's the first time that I was introduced to time travel in reading, and it just set me off to science fiction. Science fiction became one of my huge,
Oh.
huge favorites. Um, really, I was not discriminating at all.
So, as a reader, you consumed all genres. You didn't, or did you go through phases where you started reading one genre and then you kind of moved to a different one? Or
So I remember I would start at one end of the fiction shelves. I did prefer fiction, although if nonfiction was sitting around, I'd read that as well. back of the cereal box, whatever there was
Mhm.
there. So, and back of the cereal box used to be a lot more interesting than they are now, just for a point of note. Um,
But that could be because we've already read so many of them.
that's true. But when I would come to a series, I would get really excited because it's like, oh my gosh, I get to stay in this world for, 8 or 9 books. But that's pretty much how I read. I just went through the shelves. And then what I discovered is that sometimes they would put a book back that hadn't been there the first time I looked. So I always had to go and check and see which ones I had missed. I really never met a book. Well, there are a few, but I won't name them. But I really mostly have never met a book I didn't love.
Oh, that's wonderful. And has that continued as you've been writing? Because a lot of us have a harder time reading as we get deeper into the writing.
I've been really, really lucky. I still read like a reader. Occasionally, you know how you get started and you're like, oh, why did they do this? Why did they do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yep.
But then I just kind of give myself over to the writer and I don't make judgments until the end. I mean, unless, well, there's a few exceptions. Like if they do something where I'm like, oh no, this is never would happen, then I might get thrown
Oh, you're much, um you're the kind of reader that writers love more than me.
out. I think I'm a rare kind of reader. I've met a few readers like me, but mostly readers like, you know, they have a certain area that they like to read in, and I mean, I read Gibbons. Just I pretty much, even if it's dry and boring, I'll work my way through it. I just like the information and the words and how people put them together, and it's an interesting thing to me. I feel like I'm almost inside someone else's mind, and they're taking me on a tour of at least one part of it.
You were talking about the words, and I've said before that I think the emotional moment that I realized I wanted to be a writer was when Dickens called Uriah Heep unctuous. And even when I say it now, it just makes me shiver down my back. And I just thought, wow, I want to do that to people. I want to find the word that just hits so wonderfully that it does that to people. And sometimes I hear myself saying words mm, just because it was doing this the other day, lugubrious. And I just thought, what a fabulous word that is. Isn't that cool? Lugubrious. So sure as heck, it's going to show up in a book someday soon. I'm gonna
I do. I'm with you, and I don't always, because I read a lot and came across a lot of those words. I didn't always pronounce them correctly for a
Me
long
either.
time.
Yes.
But okay, so my favorite mispronunciation of all times is not my own. It's my husband's. And um, to put it in context, his father had very severe dyslexia, and our son has fairly severe dyslexia. My husband was always a reader, so no one recognized that he had dyslexia, but it shows itself in his inability to spell, and also he takes a word and he turns it into something different. So Armageddon, and he'd read a
Oh.
lot of science fiction, and he read it as Armageddon. And I totally love it because it's like you just see this gigantic robot.
Armageddon. Yeah. 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 I
Armageddon is coming.
does it sound like it should be a whole series. I had sort of the flip version of that, and I don't know. Was like in fifth or sixth grade, and there was a discussion in the classroom, and I could not figure out why they were talking about why this was such a problem. They were they were talking about youth in Asia, and I'm saying, "What? So what are the youths in Asia doing that you're all upset about? I don't get it." And it wasn't until I saw the word, I went, "Oh, okay."
But are there
Yeah,
some of your favorite things, like when you see people play with the words and you can't actually distinguish the joke
yeah.
until you look at it. You can't hear it. You can only see it. I like that. Well, I guess you see and hear it, but you have to do both.
And a lot of the humor in my books tends to have at least some of it has wordplay involved, and I've had a few of the books translated, especially the romances were some of my romances were translated to Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, that I've done. My publisher had previously translated them to all sorts of languages, but I think also cut. I know they cut a whole lot of
Yes,
stuff out.
I've heard bad things about that.
And the translators, and especially I dealt with a young woman who's doing the Spanish translations, and she is not a native English speaker. And sometimes I'd get these kind of wistful notes about, "What does this mean?
Oh,
What?" And
idioms
I'm
are
thinking,
hard.
yeah, well, an idiom and then twisting it, That's so,
Oh, that's
yes.
even oh, you know what? I never thought about that, but I do that a lot too. That would be really hard for a translator
Yeah, for what to understand it in the first place and then
because
to
'cause they'd
try to
have to know
find
what the
something that
original is. Oh, yeah.
yeah, and then try to find something in the other language that gets the feeling across without being the literal translation, because the literal translation just won't work, so
Oh, that no
yeah.
wonder they have a tough job. I can see why maybe they cut some things out from their job.
Are there things that you used to worry about? And I use the word fret because I don't want. I'm not thinking really serious issues, but things that used to bug you, and now you think, "Good grief," you know, let it go.
I worry about everything, and I've been trying to worry about things less. But one thing, and this is a personal thing, it's not the state of the world, which I am learning to just let that go. But because I'm trying to do just what I can control, and when you really drill down to what you can control, it's so very little.
Mm.
In many ways, um, you can't control the weather. I'm really tired of snow, and I can't control that, but it is spring, so hopefully.
We should say this is being recorded in
Sorry, I forgot
March,
about that.
end of March, and it'll be out later. But I don't know. The way this winter's been going, it might still be snowing when this
Yes,
is released.
and pretty much I always feel this way about snow, so I feel this way every year, where I just need to escape from it, and I can't control it, so I have to let it go and just
Well, and
enjoy
you
it.
have to tell people where you live.
Oh, I live in Maine, so
Yeah.
we get a lot of snow. But, one thing that I am seriously trying to let go of is I don't like to make other people uncomfortable, and I think I've always over worried about that and maybe held myself back a little bit from just being who I am because, oh, well, some people
Hmm.
might find that uncomfortable. And I'm slowly starting to recognize that I should just stop that. And I think age really helps. It's like, you know what? I'm too old to worry about whether or not they're uncomfortable. If they say something or they look uncomfortable, I'll go, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And, adjust instead of trying to anticipate. It's a very bad habit and it's very irritating. And I know that because someone did that to me.
I'm really glad you're letting go of that. That's wonderful. Um, to let kind of put that in your rearview mirror. Um, Good for you.
And let's hope I'm successful at it.
There's a quote, and I don't remember who said it now. I know Thomas Jefferson had a comparable one, but it's not the same one. About worry is the interest on a debt not yet incurred.
I know it absolutely does no good to worry. I mean, preparation and worry are not the same thing. And I think I used
True.
to get them confused.
Ah.
It's like, well, if I worry about it, then it won't happen. Winter has proven me
Oh.
wrong.
Oh. Year after year after year. We're going to ask you a question from a reader who says, where do your stories come from? And she says she knows an author who dreams her stories. I only know one author who had a dream that became a book, but and then she says that another author she knows has a character who suddenly takes up residence in her head. So, how are your beautiful stories born? And I'm curious, I want to add to this for you because you write in so many different genres. Do the stories in the different genres tend to come at you from different directions?
That's a really good question. I think they do, and I've never thought about that before. Um, so I think I usually find my stories sort of at the juxtaposition of this thing and that thing, and I'm like,
Mm,
why? And then I'm like, oh, okay. So I started writing science fiction early on. Short science fiction. I wrote that for a long time, and everyone kept saying, "Oh, it needs to be a novel," and I'm like, "No, it's short science fiction." And then everyone complained about my endings, so I'm like, "All right, I'm going to write a romance because nobody can complain about my
wait
ending."
a minute. What did they say about the endings?
Um,
Were they
that they
it was
just
the
didn't.
same complaint
Oh yeah,
about
always. It just ended. It didn't have the right ending. And I actually, people will say that about my romance sometimes too. I work a lot. You wouldn't know it, but I craft a lot on my endings, and I still don't have it where I feel comfortable with them. And part of it is because of all of that um, feedback from the short stories. But that was why I decided to start writing romance, because I knew how it had to end.
Hmm.
But then you have, okay, so you have two people, and every reader who picks up this book knows how it's going to end. So, how do you keep them interested? So, that was really an interesting thing. And I started thinking about all the people I knew who had relationships, and how you'd be like looking at them and thinking, those are very unlikely pair. But then when you watch them, you see what it is that they do that sort of strengthen the pair bonding. And I know that's a
Hmm.
very weird way to talk about romance, which is why I'm not actively writing it right now. So you can see my science fiction comes from that part. And then fantasy, I think, is nice because it allows you to build your own world and sort of do some of the things you do in science fiction, but without having to have a science basis for it. And I have a resident scientist. My husband is a physicist, but they're so
Hmm.
picky. They're so picky. If you drop the ball, it's always going to fall to the ground. It's never going to just suddenly rise up into the sky.
One of the questions I want to come back to you about is if your story ideas come come to you from different places based on what kind of story it is, since you're writing in all these different genres.
Yes, I think they do. That's a really good question. So for science fiction, my ideas generally would come to me because I'm wondering about the future, or about how things will look. Like, what is TV going to look like in 20 years? And or sometimes I'll complain. My husband and I, we grew up in the 60s where we thought we were going to be using jetpacks to get to work and things like that. And some of the things that science fiction predicted actually came very close to the truth. I had a flip phone that was just like a Star Trek recorder. It wasn't quite as powerful, but still. Um, and so those are the things where you think about. So we're making all of these uh, genome discoveries.
Mm-mm.
We've mapped so many genomes. We're starting to, do gene therapy. The nanites that science fiction people wrote about are starting to become real. So, what are the implications? And, science fiction, you definitely like to think, if you could make yourself live forever, would you? And would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And fiction's been doing that for a long time. So, science fiction is really starts with the ideas, but you have to have interesting people to experiment on. so one of the reasons that my science fiction in retrospect didn't do so very well is that I was choosing young mothers for a lot of my science fiction characters. And since the population was generally male, generally younger, generally, not even really married, that was kind of a strange head for them to go into. They could go into alien heads, but going into the heads of a young contemporary mother, just not so good. So that's when I switched to romance. And romance is a little bit different because the couple is getting together. The ending is already there. So you have to make the journey from two individuals to one couple that you think has actually got a decent chance to have a happily ever after. And you have to make it interesting, even though people know what the ending is. So, I had read a lot of romance. So I knew how people did that well. And I knew how people did that in a predictable way that I didn't like. So I wanted to add in the twists and turns, and I really did enjoy that. But that was a very character driven story. You really had to start with the characters. You couldn't just start with, oh, I think they're going to be, they're going to be in this environment and this is going to be the most important. Like there are some people who do that with, like, they'll put them in a war, a real historical war, because I write historical romance. But even then, in a real romance, it's the characters. It's not what's going on around them. It's not window dressing, but it is all still set to say, how do these people have a romance? How do they get together? That's something called, in contemporary romance, it's called the meet cute now. So it's like how they meet, where you have to set up as the author, okay, this is why this person doesn't think this other person is going to be anybody they're even going to like, never mind marry. So it was fun. But I've been married for almost 40 years and I haven't dated in a really long time. So
I'm sure your husband is glad to hear that. Longer than 40 years.
That's true. So it's just it's just not as interesting to me as a writer to continually go back to that. So I've started dabbling in mysteries. I swore I would never write a mystery because I didn't think I could do all the red herrings and keep the suspense up. But it's actually been fun. And that starts with, for me, character again. So I had a lot of fun writing a character set in a town like the one I was living in, and she's doing things that I have done, but then I just make them more interesting, and still have trouble with the red herrings. Sometimes I have to go back and be like, so everybody can tell who the bad guy is right away. I need to go figure out how to hide that. But revision is wonderful.
I love the red herrings so much that sometimes
You have too many.
I have, and I've gotten to the point where I think, okay, one of these people has to have done it.
I mean, I love that in mysteries. Mysteries are some of my favorite things to read, because I want to see if I can guess. And mostly, I guess who did it really early. So the people who get me to the end and surprise me, oh, I am their fans for life.
I'm terrified to say you should read one of mine. I don't know if I want to know. No, don't read it, Kelly. Don't read it. How do you feel about research? And especially as you're going into mysteries, which is a very different. You've had 3 genres, each research intensive, entirely different areas.
So I actually love research.
I had a feeling maybe you did. You wouldn't be in these genres.
It's just that it's a rabbit hole. So
Mm.
what I try and do sometimes is draft, I won't say light, like I do my research. I try and figure out, what my central problem is and what the implications would be, what the legal implications are. But I don't really, you know, I don't go into the guns and so that I have to know what kind of gun it is and what it would look like and what it would sound like yet. I won't rule it out, but I haven't done that yet. We both belong to Novelists Inc. And the conference has many times in many years offered me really good hands-on research. And also, there are other places. Like I haven't been to the
Mhm.
Writer Police Academy. Um,
Oh, you should come.
I,
Definitely.
I know it's really good, and I've always said, well, I don't write mystery, but now I can't really say that as much. So I know everybody I know who's gone has loved it. And so that's one of the things is switching from paper research. When you're studying history, mainly you just read books. You read books, you look at pictures, um, you think about, oh, what would that be like? And the disagreement for historical things is really interesting. One of my favorite things about writing historically, and I use this in fantasy sometimes, is the whole belief that, well, because women were, you know, citizens sometimes without rights, that meant that they never spoke up and they never broke the rules. And I
Mm.
I'm like, no. Yes, the reason they wrote all of these etiquette books is because people were not following the rules they thought they should follow. It's the reason we write etiquette books. I mean, do you do everything that, oh, who is the famous? I want to call her Julia Child, and that's wrong. But
No.
no, it's not. And I can't remember what her name is, but I never read her book. I just heard my
Well,
mother.
I always think Miss Manners because she was from
Yes,
the Washington Post,
yes,
so
exactly. Miss Manners, and there's plenty of others. I mean, dear Abby, she didn't write a
mm.
rule book, but she told you how you were supposed to handle problems. So yeah, all of these things are because people do what they do, you know? So assuming that everyone always followed the rules is really it's sort of implying that we were more evolved 200 years ago than we are today. And I don't believe it.
So you come up with an idea, and then, um, how do you take that idea and make it story worthy? How do you get it from that idea to be a finished book?
So I taught writing for a dozen years, so I had to explain things to people, and I came up with kind of an understanding of how I do it. And I know not everybody does it, but I see the story has a shape in my head. So I sort of like play with it and mold it and see scenes, and the characters start to talk to me, and then the story gets a shape. And I usually know the beginning and the end, and then the middle kind of forms very sinuously like a snake. And then I'm like, okay. And so I'll usually write the first scene because I do usually write chronologically.
You're one of those, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I don't always. If I get stuck, I will go to another scene that's strong, but mostly I write chronologically. And I'll usually write a scene or two until I feel like, okay, I've got the story voice, I've got the characters, I see who they are, and then I will write a quick and dirty outline. Because if I don't do that, I will start every day wondering where I'm going to go, and I'll go off on a whole bunch of tangents.
Mm.
So it's like once I have the story shape in my head, and I'm confident that I've got the voice and the characters, that I can put them on the page, then I do the quick and dirty outline, and then uh, you know I change my mind a lot, but at least I have that there to guide me. It's like, nope, nope, they're supposed to be heading from Maine to California. Italy is not in the middle of that journey.
I totally understand that. Um, I'd try to figure out a way a way to get Italy in, though. So a reader asks what your favorite place to write is and why, and I think this is so sweet. She said, "Does it have an inspirational view?" I think maybe they're wishing an inspirational view for us. And then I want to tag on to that. Do you have a writing routine? And what is it?
I don't have a writing routine. I'll answer that one first because it's something that bothers me. I used to, I've written pretty much all my life. So I've written with little kids, I've written with teenagers, and I'm writing as an empty nester now, which you would imagine would mean that I have so much free time, so much writing time, and this is just not the way it works. And so I don't want to create a routine. I want to create a ritual.
Hmm.
And because I write different places, so I travel. I I have my whole house to myself. So sometimes I like to write in my office, and sometimes if that's bothering me, I want to write in my living room. Sometimes on my porch, out in my backyard. Um, I really don't mind moving around, but I do find that it can be disruptive. So I'm trying to create just like a simple 5-step ritual, really, really simple, where it's like, okay, I'll just always do those 5 steps and start writing. Um,
And turn on your writer mind, basically.
exactly. And sort of kick my muse to the curb, be like, okay, leave me alone. I'm writing. Stop criticizing me or whatever. My writing muse is very critical. She only likes stuff once I've put it on the page. When we're staring at the blank page, she's like, "Oh, you're going to mess it up. Oh, you're going in the wrong
Oh,
direction."
that's bad. So,
She
so
is.
you're moving around to these different places. Is that an effort to get an inspirational view?
Well, actually, I'm very lucky um, that my office has actually a really nice view outside. Um, well, I'm looking at dirty snow right now, but often I'm looking at trees in bloom and birds and
Hmm.
maybe some people sitting out on the porch enjoying themselves. And for me, that works pretty well. But it's just tough when you're writing to always stay motivated. And health wise, it's good to move around. So I have a standing desk
Oh,
and
good.
I have a place to perch my laptop so that I can stand and write there. And I just added a component of sitting on the floor to write on my yoga mat in various poses that children would do adopt. Again, influenced by the recent visit to the 5 and 2-year-old, but also by some articles that say one of the really good ways to keep your flexibility is to use it, is to move around like a child does. So I have been trying it, and it's in the beginning stages, but I do find it that it helps. The one problem I have is, I'll get really into a scene and then I'll realize my feet went numb. So
Yeah.
it's just an excuse to move somewhere
It
else.
isn't usually my feet that go numb. It's it's another body part. I need more cushions under. And you'd think I have plenty of my own cushioning, and yet that body part goes numb. So
I do work standing up a lot. I like that now.
I don't. I've tried it a little bit, and I can do it for non-writing things. Well, writing that's not. I can do it from emails and stuff like that. But really writing, it's not, at least at this point, it's not, my brain is not connected to doing it that way. So we'll see what the
There
future
are different times, different like there are certain scenes where I'm like, I need to sit down. And it's funny because my body will be like, no, you need to sit down. And I'll be,
brings.
oh,
Hmm.
I need to sit down to write this scene. That is really strange. I don't know what it is.
It'd be interesting. I wonder if editing, I don't know. I'm so programmed to edit sitting down, but I'll play with that. So another,
That might be part of your ritual. If you're in, that's what I did learn is if you're going to do a ritual, you have to sort of decide what it's going to be and then use it for a little while before it
hmm
actually
hmm
kicks in.
I'm going to combine questions from two readers because they're somewhat associated. One asks how much it bothers us to find editing errors after the book is live or is printed, and the other reader asks how it feels for the author if a cover image doesn't match the character description.
So I'll take the cover question first, and it doesn't bother me much at all. It never bothered me as a reader, and it doesn't bother me as an author. And now I choose my own covers, so that's not usually an issue. But I'm not visual when I write. I'm inside my character's head, and so I have to actually make myself think about, okay, what does she look like? It's not important to me. I don't know why. I know it's really weird, and other authors are completely different. But that's why if like the character didn't look like my character, it wouldn't matter because the inside of her head still looks the same.
But you're inside her head and you're seeing the other characters and and if you're doing point of view of the other characters, you're seeing the main character.
You know, you would think that I am, but I'm not. I'm
Okay.
like seeing inside everybody's head at the same time. It's very strange. I can't explain it because I've talked to other writers enough about how they do this thing, and it's like I work differently than a lot of other people who are much more visual than I am. When I first started writing, I just never did the visual piece, and you can't write a historical romance without describing
Yeah.
the clothes. So I had to buy a book of the different Victorian clothes and just sort of look at them because I wasn't creating them in my head. I was like, oh, it's a skirt, whatever, it's a skirt.
She was dressed to go out.
Exactly. She had clothes on. What are you worried about?
So
And then
how about the editing errors then? Did they bug you?
I hate that I miss typos. Um, although because of the wordplay thing we were talking about, sometimes they delight me when they're really funny. Like I had in my first romance that I ever got published, I guess. I had written the hero had a bushy bear on his face instead of beard. And I just couldn't stop laughing when I read that because all of a sudden I'm picturing with a bear on his face. And so, those kinds of things, I get tickled more than annoyed. But the other things, like when you double words like in, or and, or any of those things that you should see, they bother me. But I have learned, I did a stint proofreading for a publishing house that did large print books. And I discovered I'm really terrible at it. I'm a very clean typist, so I don't make a lot of errors to begin with, but I'm terrible at finding probably 20% of them. So after I realized that, I just passed it on to someone else. It's like I'm the creator. It's natural that I'm not going to see these things. And I'm just not going to worry about it.
It's also very visual, and if you're not as visual, you're not going to catch those.
It's true, and I'm a very fast reader.
Well, because I've always been a pretty good editor and did edit for a long time at newspapers. And one of the things that happens to me when I'm reading for pleasure is I will read and then I will realize there has been an error, and I have not registered exactly what it is. And I'll have to go back. I'll go
And
back
you
to
have
the
to find it.
previous paragraph. Oh, yes, I've got to find it. And I'll go back to the previous paragraph, and there it is. But it has visually and then mentally registered that there was a typo.
I can do that, but I'm only about 80%. That's my level. And I for a time I tried to get 100% is probably unrealistic, but I tried to get up to 99, and I realized I can't. I get caught up in the story. And so the typical way that a proofreader does this, not a copy editor, but a proofreader is they go backwards. They read
Yep.
the sentence backwards so that they don't get caught up in the story.
Yeah. You
And
start at the
I'm not.
bottom of pages and work up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's too tedious for me. I need someone else to do that because I can't. I'm just a reader. A reader. I need to because it has to make sense to me. And that's the other thing is when we're writing our story, the other thing we're looking for always is does this make sense? Was this the best way to do it? Does this really get the feeling across? We're looking for all those nuances that a proofreader is not really looking for. So I change them when I find them.
Do you find that your stories change a lot from when you first have the idea to when it's the finished book? Or do you stay pretty much with that core initial idea?
I think I stay with the core initial idea most of the time.
Mm.
Not always. I have had one story that's grown into a monster, in a good way, but it means that it's like a hydra. It's got so many heads that spring out every time I try and tackle one. Um, but mostly, I think because when I finally start writing a story, I see the shape. So the shape stays the same.
Mm.
It's just what happens to make the shape the shape. And I know that's a really strange way to say it, but that's what it is. It is in my head. It's a shape, and I feel the movement of it more than I see the characters or the settings, which is why I can tell. Oh yes, that's what should have happened here. But then I have to say, okay, what room did it happen in?
Where were they? Yeah. Do you think you've changed or evolved as a writer since you were first published? So I not not from the very beginning of when you started, but once your book stuff was good enough and it was published, from now till then.
So I think that writers always change. We change with every book. Um,
Mm.
we can't help it because we're telling different stories and we're thinking about different things. And well, I don't know. Maybe other people don't. I shouldn't speak for other people, but I'm always trying to do something a little bit different and see, kind of like you were saying. I want to see if I can break the rules and get away with it. But you have to know the rules first, as they say. Although I'm not sure that's always true. Sometimes complete ignorance is really, a good thing.
It's very freeing.
But no, I don't. I don't think you ever stop growing or changing as a writer, and I think
Can
that's the fun part of it.
can you look back to when you were first published and look at now, and can you see anything specific in how you've evolved?
I was so regimented when I first started writing romance. So with science, so this is kind of funny, but some people might relate. I have told this before, but when I first started writing, I wrote short science fiction because that was what I read, and because I was when I first started writing to get published, seriously, I was married, had a baby, was working full time, and was going to school part time. So I was really busy, and I had basically I would write a story in one sitting.
Mm.
And so I would think about the story. The story would be rolling around in the back of my head for a long time, but then I got like 4 hours to write it. So I would sit down and write it. So they tended to be shorter stories.
Yes.
And then I would go critique them with a writing group that I belonged to. And sometimes they would get longer, but mostly they didn't, which was kind of interesting. So a lot of what I did in the beginning, I wanted to try a novel, but I didn't see how I could possibly sit down and write an entire novel in one sitting.
No. We're back to
Yeah.
that body part falling asleep.
So it held me back for a really long time until I finally somehow, and I don't know how I missed this because I used to read, Writer's Digest and other writers' magazines, and I talked to writers. And finally, I realized that a scene is basically like a short story, and that you just connect them and they're
Ah,
loosely. And I'm like, oh, that's how you do it. So, but I was very regimented. So it was like, okay, I read the rules for writing a romance novel. I was like, okay, I know they have to get together at the end. So I'm going to write my first novel. I don't want to get to the end and find out that it's ended wrong. So I'm going to write a romance where I know the ending. So I had that decided. And so it's like, okay, so 20 pages a chapter. And that was what I did. And now I write in scenes, and I write the scene however long I think the scene needs to be. And if it's 2 lines, so be it. And if it's 10 pages, so be it. It just has to feel right to me. And I never could have done that writing my first couple of novels. I needed the
yeah,
structure.
yeah. Well, I think that's it's scary jumping off into a novel, and I can empathize with that desire to know, you know, the rules, and but how do you do it, and to give yourself some structure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Even for me, who is not particularly structured. So, um, what's something you are really good at that few people know about?
So okay, I'm really good at paying attention, but few people know that because so often I'm not paying attention. I'm only good at it when I'm trying to do it. So, everyone who's lives with me knows that sometimes I will walk by the refrigerator door 5 times before noticing that it's open, and then shutting it. So it's like, but if I was looking at that refrigerator and trying to figure out what made it tick, I'd be like, well, it's making noise because the door is open, so let's shut it. So I think that's my thing that nobody
Interesting.
knows. I
Okay.
can be very attentive.
Now, and with dealing with these different genres, do you have readership overlap, or do you find that you have different readerships for each?
I have different readerships for each. And it kind of makes sense because we were talking about how we're moving toward a time when people, and I don't even call it a search engine, I would call it a recommendation engine, where you're going to be able to have your music and your movies and your books recommended to your specific tastes and
Mm.
needs. And so I think the people who read my cozy mysteries are looking for something different than the people who are reading my historical romance. They're different stories. They have some overlap, and so a reader like me, who's completely omnivorous, would definitely read all of them. But other people, the other thing I think, and I'm actually trying to figure this out, but I know it's true for me, is that at different times in my life, I've wanted to read different things.
Mm.
A lot of times it depended on, what I was going through, what I was trying to process. So I think maybe there might be readers who would cross over 20 years later, you know.
Yeah, for me, it's not just different times of my life. It's different times of the day, and different things. Well, then, have you had what sort of interaction have you had with readers about that? Do you have any good stories about dealing with readers?
My readers have all been pretty sweet. Talk about my characters and what they like about them, but I haven't actually delved into it with them about. I'm hesitant. I like to talk to my readers, but I'm hesitant to talk to them about my books because it feels like, for one, since I come from a reader perspective, and the reader's interaction with your book is personal in some
Mm.
sense.
Oh,
It's like
yes, it is.
I know what I want them to get out of it, and I'm pleased when they do. But if they didn't like something or whatever, they might not want to tell me. They might just want to not like it because it's like if I see somebody who has a hairdo I don't think is complimentary, I'm really not going to go out of my way to tell them that. Even if they ask me, I'm going to be very polite about it and just say, well, maybe you'd look better in this other one, but So I feel like once I've written a book, I don't really want to be sitting. My beta readers are a different story, but regular readers who come to the book without being beta readers, I just want to have a conversation with them about general things like, what's it like to be a mom? Have you ever thought about being a mystery shopper? Because my cozy mystery is set around a mystery shopper. Have you ever thought about, would you want to go back and live in Victorian times, or do you just like to visit in the book? Because I really like history, but I don't think I would want to actually travel back into history.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm. I
I like
agree. The
flush
height
toilets,
again. Yeah.
showers.
Gotta have that indoor plumbing.
Definitely.
So, if you could, this is a wonderful question from a reader. If you could write a book with any other author, alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's really difficult. If alive, definitely I would love to write a book with J.K. Rowling because she has the
Mm.
most vivid visual imagination. I mean, I read her books aloud to my kids when we were on long drives. And, when I read books aloud to my children to save my voice, I would try and skip the boring parts. And I could never find anything to skip in hers, which was terrible.
Oh, what a wonderful compliment. That
Very
may be the
long.
best compliment ever to a writer.
Oh, and speaking about how, like, when I read a word, I don't necessarily know what it means. So Hermione, for the first three books, was Hermione.
Oh,
And so a friend corrected me, and I said, okay. And then it took me, I guess, 2 hours of reading to actually make the change because Hermione was so natural to me. So I would have to go Hermione. My kids just laughed at me. But, it makes for stories.
right. Right. I like that. It makes for stories. A lot of life's ups and downs. We can say that. The old, I can use that in a book someday.
But if I were to pick a dead writer, then I don't Jonathan Swift maybe. Although I hear
Oh.
he was a miserable human being, but he had such a great imagination.
Isn't that sad that somebody who had such a great imagination was a miserable human being?
Well,
That's too
I mean,
bad.
he may not have
Yeah.
been. I don't know. I mean,
Mm.
bitter people, right? Bitter things. But
So let's look at this from the reader's viewpoint, especially with your different genres. What book would be a good place for somebody new to you to start?
well, I have two perma-free books, so those are always good starts. And my first historical romance in my series, The Fairy Tale Bride, is free
Mm.
to try, and
As an ebook,
as an ebook, yes.
right? Shipping and handling gets a little tough to offer
Yeah,
the physical books.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's actual printing costs and I guess we're
Mm.
lucky that the retailers allow us to offer books for free, I guess. There is some small charge for them. And then my first cozy mystery, which is Shop and Let Die, is also a free and available as an ebook for people to try.
Great.
And I have some short stories, so anybody who's in Kindle Unlimited can read my short stories without charge. But I'm trying to think of good ways to read. I guess I have a couple of books started on Wattpad, if anyone is a Wattpad reader.
Hmm. Okay. Well, that gives people options. Um, uh, now, of your other books, would you consider any? Do you have any that you would consider sort of an overlooked gem that for some reason even the readers who have followed you from genre to genre have not really honed in on at this point?
So I do have a book that I I think is a wonderful book, but it's also a problematic book. So I had to write it, and it sprang from, speaking about how books come into us, it sprang from my concerns when my children, particularly my sons, were going through middle and high school. Was when the school shootings really started to ramp up and people started to talk about them. It almost seems like halcyon days nowadays. It seems like it's gotten a lot worse recently. But I was just always concerned about it, concerned about why, concerned. And so in the middle of writing another book that was contracted to my publisher, I suddenly got this idea, and I had to write it. So I wrote it. It's Blood Angel is what it's called. I almost hesitate to ask people to read it because it's a tough subject, and it's like you have to be in exactly the right frame of mind and place to read it. I mean, it's a little bit of a hopeful book, but it's much more the literary Oprah kind of hope than anything else. So, but I love that book so much, and the readers who've read it, really enjoyed it. But I always feel like it's one of those books where I hope if somebody needs to read it, they read it, and otherwise, go with my happier stuff because I really like to leave people happy at the end.
Where can readers find out more about you and your books?
On my website, kellymcclymerbooks.com. I'm also on Facebook, Kelly McClymer Books. I'm not good on Facebook though, and I apologize for that. I always try and want to be good, but I'm not, because Facebook is one of those rabbit holes. If I go on there, then I start looking for pictures of my grandchildren and my nieces and my nephews, and then I, don't get any work done.
We will tell people it's Kelly with a Y, and McClymer is McClymer. It will be on the show notes, easily clickable for folks, but I wanted to make sure that it had that. Okay, now my favorite part: either ors.
Uh-oh.
Rapid fire. You have the two choices in each one of these. So let's start with ice cream or cake.
Cake.
Spring or fall.
Ooh, that's hard. You know what? Fall in Maine, you can't beat it.
Okay. But you got through one. Daisies or roses?
Roses.
Hot air balloon or train trip?
Okay, these are hard. Hot air balloon.
Okay. Cat or dog?
Cat.
House decorating or gardening?
Neither. I'm sorry. Reading.
Okay. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
You have to pick one of these. Winter Olympics or Summer Olympics?
Oh, Summer Olympics.
Nail polish or bare nails?
Bare nails.
Opera or show tunes?
Oh, show tunes.
Day or night?
Night.
Oh, that was harder for you than I thought. Okay.
It was harder, but I'm sitting in the dark and I like it.
Pickup or sports car?
Pickup.
Hiking boots or cowboy boots?
Hiking boots.
Paper plates or best china?
Paper plates.
Okay, and this is the last one. Grab the best first or save the best for last?
Save the best for last. That's a good one.
That's terrific. Thank you so much, Kelly. This is a lot of fun. I really enjoyed having you as a guest on the Authors Love Readers podcast, talking books and reading and writing. And to all the listeners out there, hope you'll come back next week to hear another author and learn more about what goes on in our strange minds and the stories behind the stories. And I wish you, in the meantime, a great week of reading. That's the show for this week. Hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for joining Authors Love Readers podcast. Remember, you can always find out more about our guest authors in the show notes, and you can find out more about me at www.patriciamclynn.com. podcast@authorslovereaders.com. You can also send in questions to be asked of future authors at podcast@authorslovereaders.com. Until next week, wishing you lots of happy reading. Bye. If you like this podcast, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter through our Patreon page. With a small monthly donation as little as $1 a month, you can help with the hosting and editing costs that make the show possible. To thank our Patreon supporters, we offer them special bonuses. Find out more at authorslovereaders.com or at patreon.com/authorslovereaders. That's PATREON. We also hope you'll subscribe to this podcast and leave us a review wherever you listen to us. Both of those help more folks find the podcast. Of course, the very best way for other folks to find the podcast is for you to tell them about it. So we sure hope you will.